Section 27 of The Morals, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Moyer. The Morals, Volume 1, by Plutarch. Translated by several hands. Corrected and revised by William W. Goodwin. Concerning the Virtues of Women. Part 3. Example 20. Kama. There were two most potent persons among the tetrarchs of Galatia, allied by kin to each other, Synatus and Sunorix, one of which, Synatus, took a maid to wife, Kama by name, very comely to behold for person and favour, but principally to be admired for virtue. For she was not only modest and loving to her husband, but discreet and of a generous mind. And by reason of her gentle and courteous behaviour, she was extremely acceptable to her inferiors. Yea, that which rendered her more eminently renowned was, that being a priest of Diana, for the Galatians worship that goddess most, she did always appear magnificently adorned in all sacred processions and at the sacrifices. Wherefore Synorix, falling in love with her, could not prevail either by persuasions or violence, whilst her husband lived. He commits a horrid crime. He slays Synatus treacherously, and not long after accosts Kama, whilst she abode within the temple, and bore Synorix's crime not in an abject and despondent manner, but with a mind intent upon revenge on Synorix, and only waiting an opportunity. He was importunate in his humble addresses, neither did he seem to use arguments that were without all show of honesty. For as in other things he pretended that he far excelled Synatus, so he slew him for the love he bare to Kama, and for no other wicked design. The woman's denials were at first not very peremptory, and then by little and little she seemed to be softened towards him. Her familiars and friends also lay at her in the service and favour of Synorix, who was a man of great power, persuading and even forcing her. In fine, therefore she consented, and accordingly sent for him to come to her, that the mutual contract and covenant might be solemnized in the presence of the goddess. When he came, she received him with much courtesy, and bringing him before the altar and pouring out some of the drink offering upon the altar out of the bowls, part of the remainder she drank herself, and part she gave him to drink. The cup was poisoned mead. As she saw him drink it all up, she lifted up a shrill loud voice, and fell down and worshipped her goddess, saying, I call thee to witness, O most reverend divinity, that for this very day's work's sake I have overlived the murder of Synatus, no otherwise taking any comfort in this part of my life, but in the hope of revenge that I have had. And now I go down to my husband. And for thee, the lewdest person among men, let thy relations prepare a sepulchre instead of a bride chamber and nuptials. When the Galatian heard these things, and perceived the poison to wamble up and down and indispose his body, he ascended his chariot, hoping to be relieved by the jogging and shaking. But he presently alighted, and put himself into a litter, and died that evening. Cama continued all that night, and being told that he had ended his life, she comfortably and cheerfully expired. Example 21. Stratonica. Galatea also produced Stratonica, the wife of Deiotarus, and Chiomara, the wife of Ortiagon, both of them women worth remembrance. Stratonica, knowing that her husband wanted children of his own body to succeed in his kingdom, she, being barren, persuaded him to beget a child on another woman, and subject it to her tutelage. Deiotarus, admiring her proposal, committed all to her care upon that account. She provided a comely virgin for him from among the captives, Electra by name, and brought her to lie with Deiotarus. The children begotten of her she educated very tenderly and magnificently, as if they had been her own. Example 22. Chiomara. It fell out that Chiomara, the wife of Ortiagon, was taken captive with other women in the time when the Romans under Gnaeus Manlius overcame the Galatians of Asia in battle. The centurion that took her made use of his fortune soldier-like, and defiled her. For he was, as to voluptuousness and covetousness, an ill-bred and insatiable man, over whom avarice had gotten an absolute conquest. A great quantity of gold being promised by the woman for her ransom, in order to her redemption he brought her to a certain bank of a river. As the Galatians passed over and paid him the money in gold, and received Chiomara into their possession, she gave an intimation of her pleasure to one of them by nod, to smite the Roman while he was kissing and taking his leave of her. He obeyed her commands, and cut off his head. She takes it, wraps it up in her apron, and carries it with her. And as she comes to her husband, she casts down the head before him, at which being startled, he said, "O wife, thy fidelity is noble." "Yea, verily," replied she, "it is a nobler thing that there is now but one man alive that hath ever lain with me." Polybius saith that he discoursed with this woman at Sardis, and admired her prudence and discretion. Example 23. Of the woman of Pergamos. When Mithridates sent for 60 noblemen of Galatea as friends, he seemed to carry himself abusively and imperiously towards them, which they were all mightily provoked at. Polydorix, a man of a robust body and lofty mind, who was no less than tetrarch of the Tusiopai, designed to lay hold on Mithridates, seizing him when he should be determining causes on the bench of judicature in the gymnasium, and to force him, bench and all, into the ditch. But by a certain chance he went not up to the place of judicature that day, but sent for the Galatians to come home to him to his house. Polydorix encouraged them all to be of good courage, and when they should be all come together there, to fall upon him on every side, slay him, and cut his body in pieces. This conspiracy was not unknown to Mithridates, an intimation of it being given him. Accordingly he delivers up the Galatians one by one to be slain. But calling to mind a young man among them, who excelled in comeliness and beauty all whom he knew, he commiserated him, and repented himself, and was apparently grieved, supposing him slain among the first, and also sent his command that if he were alive he should remain so. The young man's name was Bepolitanus. There was a strange accident befell this man. When he was apprehended, he had on very gay and rich apparel, which the executioner desired to preserve clean from being stained with blood. And undressing the young man leisurely, he saw the king's messengers running to him and calling out the name of the youth. So that covetousness, which is the ruin of many, unexpectedly saved the life of Bepolitanus. But Polydorix, being slain, was cast forth unburied, and none of his friends did dare to come near him. Only a certain woman of Pergamus, that was conversant with him while he lived at Galatia, attempted to cover his corpse and bury it. But when the guards perceived her, they laid hold on her and brought her before the king. And it is reported that Mithridates was much affected at the sight of her, the young maid seeming altogether harmless, and the more so, as it seemed, because he knew that love was the reason of her attempt. He gave her leave, therefore, to take away the corpse and bury it, and to take grave clothes and ornaments at his cost. Example 24. Timoclea. Theagenes the Theban, who held the same sentiments with regard to his country's welfare with Epaminondas, Pelopidas, and the other most worthy Thebans, was slain in Chaeronea, in the common disaster of Greece, even then when he had conquered his enemies and was in pursuit of them. For it was he that answered one who cried out aloud to him, "How far wilt thou pursue?" Even, saith he, to Macedonia. When he was dead, his sister survived him, who gave testimony that he was nobly descended, and that he was naturally a great man and excellently accomplished. Moreover, this woman was so fortunate as to reap a great benefit by her prowess, so that the more public calamities fell upon her, so much the easier she bore them. For when Alexander took Thebes, and the soldiers fell a plundering, some in one part and some in another, it happened that a man, neither civil nor sober, but mischievous and mad, took up his quarters in Timoclea's house. He was a captain to a Thracian company, and the king's namesake, but nothing like him. For he, having no regard either to the family or estate of this woman, when he had swilled himself in wine after supper, commanded her to come and lie with him. Neither ended he here, but enquired for gold and silver, whether she had not some hid by her, sometimes threatening as if he would kill her, sometimes flattering as if he would always repute her in the place of a wife. She, taking the occasion offered by him, said, "Would God I had died before this night came, rather than lived to it; that though all other things had been lost, I might have preserved my body free from abuse. But now seeing it is thus come to pass, and divine Providence hath thus disposed of it that I must repute thee my guardian, lord, and husband, I will not hold anything from thee that is thine own. And as for myself, I see I am at thy disposition. As for corporeal enjoyments, the world was mine, I had silver bowls, I had gold, and some money. But when this city was taken, I commanded my maids to pack it up altogether, and threw it, or rather put it for security, into a well that had no water in it. Neither do many know of it, for it hath a covering, and nature hath provided a shady wood round about it. Take then these things, and much good may they do thee, and they shall lie by thee as certain tokens and marks of the late flourishing fortune and splendor of our family." When the Macedonian heard these things, he stayed not for day, but presently went to the place by Timoclea's conduct, commanding the garden door to be shut, that none might perceive what they were about. He descended in his mourning vestment. But the revengeful Clotho brought dreadful things upon him by the hand of Timoclea, who stood on the top of the well. For as soon as she perceived by his voice that he reached the bottom, she threw down abundance of stones upon him, and her maids rolled in many and great ones, till they had dashed him to pieces and buried him under them. As soon as the Macedonians came to understand this, and had taken up the corpse, there having been late proclamation that none of the Thebans should be slain, they seized her and carried her before the king, and declared her audacious exploit. But the king, who by the gravity of her countenance and stateliness of her behavior did perceive in her something that savored of the greatest worth and nobility, asked her first, "What woman art thou?" She courageously and undauntedly answered, "Theagenes was my brother, who was a commander at Chaeronea, and lost his life fighting against you in defence of the Grecian liberty, that we might not suffer any such thing. And seeing I have suffered things unworthy of my rank, I refuse not to die, for it is better so to do than to experience another such a night as the last, which awaits me unless thou forbid it." All the most tender-spirited persons that were present broke out into tears. But Alexander was not for pitying her, as being a woman above pity; but he admired her fortitude and eloquence, which had taken strong hold on him, and charged his officers to have a special care, and look to the guards, lest any such abuse be offered again to any renowned family; and dismissed Timoclea, charging them to have a special regard to her and all that should be found to be of her family. Example 25. Eryxo. Arcesilaus was the son of Battus, who was surnamed Felix, not at all like to his father in his conversation. His father, when he lived, laid a fine of a talent upon him for making fortifications about his house. After his father's death, he being of a rugged disposition, therefore surnamed the Severe, and following the counsels of Laarchus, an ill friend, became a tyrant instead of a king. For Laarchus affecting the government for himself, either banished or slew the noblemen of Cyrene, and charged the fault upon Arcesilaus; and at last casting him into a wasting and grievous disease, by giving him the sea hare in his drink, he deprived him of his life. So that Laarchus assumed the government, under pretence of being protector to Arcesilaus's young son Battus; but the youth, by reason either of his lameness or youthful age, was contemned. As for his mother, many made addresses to her, being a modest and courteous woman, and she had many of the commons and nobility at her devotion. Therefore Laarchus, pretending to be her humble servant, would needs marry her, and thereby take Battus to the dignity of being son, and then allow him a share in the government. But Eryxo, for that was the woman's name, taking counsel of her brethren, bade Laarchus treat with them as if she had designed marriage. Laarchus accordingly treating with Eryxo's brethren, they on purpose delay and prolong the business. Eryxo sends one of her maidservants, acquainting him that for the present her brethren did oppose the match, but if they could but accomplish it so as to lie together once, her brethren would cease arguing the matter any farther, and would give their consent. He should therefore come to her by night, if he pleased. An entrance being once made in a business, the rest will succeed well enough. These things were mighty pleasing to Laarchus, and he was much inflamed by the woman's obliging carriage towards him, and declared that he would come to whatever place she should command him. These things Eryxo transacted with the privity of Polyarchus, her eldest brother. A time being now appointed for the congress, Polyarchus placed himself in his sister's bedchamber, together with two young men that were swordmen, all out of sight, to revenge the death of his father, whom Laarchus had lately murdered. Eryxo sending at the time to acquaint him, he entered without his guard, and the young men falling upon him, he was wounded with the sword and died. The corpse immediately they threw over the wall. Battus they brought forth and proclaimed king over his father's dominions, and Polyarchus restored to the Cyrenaeans their ancient constitution of government. There were present at that time many soldiers of Amasis, the Egyptian king, whom Laarchus had employed and found faithful, and by whose means he had been not a little formidable to the citizens. These sent messengers to accuse Polyarchus and Eryxo to Amasis. At this the king was greatly incensed, and determined to make war upon the Cyrenaeans. But it happened that his mother died, and while he was solemnizing her funeral, ambassadors came and brought the news of his intentions to Cyrene. Wherefore it was thought best by Polyarchus to go and apologize for himself. Eryxo would not desert him, but was resolved to accompany him and run the same hazard with him. Nor would his mother Critola leave him, though she was an old woman, for great was her dignity, she being the sister of old Battus, surnamed Felix. As soon as they came into Egypt, as others with admiration approved of the exploit, so even Amasis himself did not a little applaud the chastity and fortitude of Eryxo, honoring her with presents and royal attendance, with which he sent back Polyarchus and the ladies into Cyrene. Example 26. Xenocrita. Xenocrita of Cumae deserves no less to be admired for her exploits against Aristodemus the tyrant, whom some have supposed to be surnamed the Effeminate, being ignorant of the true story. He was called by the barbarians Malakos, that is soft and effeminate, with regard merely to his youth, because when he was a mere stripling, with other companions of the same age who wore long hair, whence they were called Coronistae, as it seems from their long hair. He became famous in the war against the barbarians. He was also not only renowned for resolution and activity, but very exceedingly remarkable for his discretion and providence; insomuch that being admired by the citizens, he proceeded to the highest dominion among them. He was to bring aid to the Romans when they were in war with the Etrurians, who engaged to restore Tarquinius Superbus to his kingdom. In all which expedition, that was very long, he managed all affairs so as to ingratiate himself with the military part of the citizens, aiming more at the making himself head of a popular faction than general of the army. He accordingly prevails with them to join with him in attacking the senate, and in casting out the citizens of highest rank and most potent into exile. Afterwards becoming tyrant, he was flagitious in his carriage towards women and freeborn youth, and exceeded even himself in vileness. For history reports of him how that he accustomed the boys to wear their hair long and set with golden ornaments, and the girls he compelled to be polled round, and to wear youths' jerkins and short-tailed petticoats. Notwithstanding, he had a peculiar affection for Xenocrita, a girl of Cumae, left behind by her exiled father. Her he kept, but could not bring over to his humor by any insinuations or persuasions, neither had he gained her father's consent. However, he reckoned the maid would be brought to love him by constant conversation with him, since she would be envied and reputed very happy by the citizens. But these things did not at all besot the maid, but she took it heinously that she must be constrained to dwell with him, not espoused or married. Neither did she less long for the liberty of her native country than did those who were hated by the tyrant. It happened about that time that Aristodemus was casting up an entrenchment about the borders of Cumae, a work neither necessary nor profitable, only because he was resolved to tire out the citizens with hard toil and labor; for every one was required to carry out a stinted number of baskets of earth daily, in order to the delving this ditch. A certain maid, as she saw Aristodemus approaching, ran aside and covered her face with her apron. But when Aristodemus was withdrawn, the young men would sport and jest with her, asking her whether out of modesty she avoided only the sight of Aristodemus, and was not so affected towards other men. She made answer designedly, rather than otherwise, that of the Cumaeans Aristodemus was the only man. This sentence, thus spoken, verily touched them all very near, for it provoked the generous-minded men among them for very shame to the recovering of their liberties. And it is said that Xenocrita was heard to say that she had rather carry earth for her father if he were at home, than participate in the great luxury and pomp of Aristodemus. These things added courage to them that were about to make an insurrection against Aristodemus, which Thymoteles had the chief management of. For Xenocrita providing them safe admittance, they easily rushed in upon Aristodemus, unarmed and unguarded, and slew him. In this manner the city of Cumae gained its liberty, by the virtue of two women; one by suggesting and invigorating the enterprise, the other by bringing it to an issue. When honors and great presents were tendered to Xenocrita, she refused all, but requested one thing, that she might bury the corpse of Aristodemus. This they delivered her, and made her a priestess of Ceres, reckoning that, as it was a deserved honor bestowed on her, so she would be no less acceptable to the goddess. Example 27. The wife of Pythes. It is reported that the wife of Pythes, who lived at the time of Xerxes, was a wise and courteous woman. Pythes, as it seems, finding by chance some gold mines, and falling vastly in love with the riches got out of them, was insatiably and beyond measure exercised about them. And he brought down likewise the citizens, all of whom alike he compelled to dig or carry or refine the gold, doing nothing else, many of them dying in the work, and all being quite worn out. Their wives laid down their petition at his gate, addressing themselves to the wife of Pythes. She bade them all depart, and be of good cheer. But those goldsmiths which she confided most in she required to wait upon her, and confining them, commanded them to make up golden loaves, all sorts of junkets and summer fruits, all sorts of fish and flesh meats, in which she knew Pythes was most delighted. All things being provided, Pythes coming home then, for he happened to go a long journey, and asking for his supper, his wife set a golden table before him, having no edible food upon it, but all golden. Pythes admired the workmanship for its imitation of nature. When, however, he had sufficiently fed his eyes, he called in earnest for something to eat. But his wife, when he asked for any sort, brought it of gold. Whereupon being provoked, he cried out, I am an hungered. She replied, Thou hast made none other provisions for us. Every skilful science and art being laid aside, no man works in husbandry. But neglecting sowing, planting, and tilling the ground, we delve and search for useless things, killing ourselves and our subjects. These things moved Pythes, but not so as to give over all his works about the mine. For he now commanded a fifth part of the citizens to that work, the rest he converted to husbandry and manufactures. But when Xerxes made an expedition into Greece, Pythes, being most splendid in his entertainments and presents, requested a gracious favor of the king, that since he had many sons, one might be spared from the camp to remain with him, to cherish his old age. At which Xerxes in a rage slew this son only which he desired, and cut him in two pieces, and commanded the army to march between the two parts of the corpse. The rest he took along with him, and all of them were slain in the wars. At which Pythes fell into a despairing condition, so that he fell under the like suffering with many wicked men and fools. He dreaded death, but was weary of his life. Yea, he was willing not to live, but could not cast away his life. He had this project. There was a great mound of earth in the city, and a river running by it, which they called Pythopolites. In that mound he prepared him a sepulchre, and diverted the stream so as to run just by the side of the mound, the river lightly washing the sepulchre. These things being finished, he enters into the sepulchre, committing the city and all the government thereof to his wife, commanding her not to come to him, but to send his supper daily laid on a sloop, till the sloop should pass by the sepulchre with the supper untouched, and then she should cease to send, as supposing him dead. He verily passed in this manner the rest of his life, but his wife took admirable care of the government, and brought in a reformation of all things amiss among the people. Section 27.